While protesters in our area demonstrated over the weekend, a few local activists went to Minneapolis to show their support for George Floyd. Among them was Chivona Newsome. She's the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Greater New York, and she joins me live this morning. So good morning to you, Chivona. Thank you for making the time this morning. I do understand, you and other members of Black Lives Matter traveled to Minneapolis. So tell me first and foremost this morning on this Monday, after a very interesting weekend where we saw a lot of grief, a lot of anger on the ground, what you're witnessing there.
I am actually back in New York. I got back yesterday at 12 p.m. and I spent last night on the ground here in New York City. But I was in the very spot where George Floyd had lost his life when I found out that only one officer had been arrested. Most of the protesters were peaceful, using their voice, which is our constitutional right to express their frustration and outrage. And there were just a few agitators. There were a few people who wanted to start fires and do those things. But for the most part, around the death site of George Floyd was a safe space where people were grieving, people were praying. But I don't feel that that's being highlighted. It's easier to take away from a movement by showing violence instead of the mass of people who are peacefully calling for change.
Were you able to actually speak to any of those agitators, find out what exactly they are trying to do here, taking away from the important message, like you said, of remembering George Floyd?
As an organizer who spent the betterment of my life fighting for liberation, the agitators, you can't recognize them. When you're marching peacefully, you'll hear the sound of a glass breaking, or you'll turn around and see a fire. That's what leads us to believe that they are plants, because for the most part, everyone's singing and chanting and all moving in the same direction. Or if you double back to another location, that location will then be on fire. But the agitators are not on the front lines. Most of them you do not know. And what was happening on the ground in Minneapolis was, as the police department and National Guard began to throw tear gas, there was already tear gas coming from out of the crowds. So it leads me to believe that these are not movement protesters. These are not people honoring George Floyd, and it's just not the case. And in terms of burning down most of the businesses, there were a lot of small businesses in Minneapolis that had Black owned, people of color, minority owned, and it was a great gathering. Right. People were out there handing out granola bars and food. It was, for the most part, peaceful for the amount of people that came out.
So then take me to what happened in New York over the weekend as well, then, because I want to make sure we're clear on the messaging here. The agitators are one thing, right? But for the majority, everybody is peacefully protesting. And actually, outside of the Target in Brooklyn, we saw some of those protesters try to stop the looting from happening from those agitators. So what is your message then for those who are peacefully protesting, and if they see something else happening around them? And what's your interaction with police on the front lines? Are the clashes with police only for the agitators, or is it happening with the peaceful protests as well?
But as we've seen from the video, the police tend to be the agitators with the people on the front lines. Most of the people on the front lines are usually organizers, or people who really care deeply and want this revolution in this country. These are not protests. This is a rebellion against a system that has oppressed, especially Black people, for 400 years. How many times do we need to hashtag? How many times does another Black man need to die on camera before we have a legislative change? In terms of the police have, you can see from the videos clearly that they're shoving and pushing people who don't cause an imminent threat. They used their batons out of Minneapolis to hit the shins of folks who were calmly and peacefully protesting. Yes, raising your voice, but they pose no threat. What made me come back to New York, aside for us in Minneapolis being hunted down, there was really a warning on the news saying outside organizers, please come to their hotel. Let us know where their hotels were. They are domestic terrorists. But to see the NYPD and Bill de Blasio and Commissioner Shea allow SUVs to plow into New York, I knew that I had to be home. And that's why last night we had a unified march. There were no arrests in the march I led, with almost 1,000 people from Washington Square Park down to City Hall Park.
Right. And lastly, I want to ask you what kind of help would you like to see, right? What kind of help would you like to see from everyday New Yorkers who may be watching right now and say, okay, I wasn't out there yet, but I want to help and I want to do something. No matter their color, no matter their race, their background, they want to do something. What are you looking for?
I I need people to go out and vote. I am a candidate for Congress in New York 15 because our current politicians have failed us. We've called on every single governor around the nation to pass an executive order for the I Can't Breathe Act, making it a felony if the police officer allows someone to die, like we've seen with Eric Gardner and now with George Floyd. So I need everyone to go out and vote on June 23rd. And in the interim, call your local politician and demand justice. And you can find me at New York Vonnie. That's the full word, VONNY, on all social media platforms. And we are laying out a blueprint, us and Black Lives Matter, Greater New York, which I co-founded, to give everyone tools and guidelines on how to organize. Everyone isn't a frontline person, but there is something that you can use your activism to do, no matter who you are.
Chivona, I appreciate the time this morning and your perspective. Thank you for talking with us this morning, and stay safe to you, okay?
Thank you. God bless. Good morning.